Morning, everybody. It's Miss Graves. I'm here summarizing pages 226 to 256. In this section, the author is using really short chapters, and the effect that creates is it keeps things moving. The author gives just enough detail to get you sucked into the action, but not so much detail that the story moves slowly. And so they're trying to connect all kinds of things. These short chapters are, this is what's going on over here, and at the same time, this is what's going on over there. And it does drum up some excitement. So, 226, we start off with Lev. Lev sneaks away and has a meeting with some people in secret. It really reveals a dark side to him, and we're supposed to guess who these people are. It's a group of people that were introduced a long time ago in the book, and I know my class talked about it, and we think that these people that he's hanging around with now are clappers, and so we think that Lev is being turned into a clapper. We also learned in this chapter that it was not Roland who killed the Goldens, but it was this group of people. Chapter 36, Rissa thinks to the future and goes to the study jet, and she bumps into Connor. Connor warns her against the Admiral, saying that he's probably going to look at her to replace the Goldens, and he wants her to turn it down. In this chapter, they do things called work calls, where the Admiral finds these jobs for the kids to do out in the real world, and it's their chance to kind of get out until they turn 18 instead of being trapped in the little airplane hangar. Lev volunteers for the job, and Rissa confronts him and says, "What are you doing? You have no business taking these jobs. You're only like 13, 14. And on page 237, Lev replies back to her. I wrote that page number down because I thought there was a quote that was important. He said, "There are things I have to do. I don't expect you to understand. I'm sorry I'm not who you wanted me to be, but I've changed." Really important. Chapter 37, they're focusing on MB and the Admiral. MB is the character that they call the mouth breather. And in this chapter, the Admiral does something kind of weird. He sends MB to live with his ex-wife. And then on page 240, somebody comes into the office and calls him Admiral Dunphy. You've heard that name before. There's a story about a kid named Dunphy who was unwound. And it throws MB into like this asthmatic attack, and the Admiral says, "My son had asthma. He responded well to Xolair, like a medicine." He looks up at one of the men behind MB. "Please make sure you get some Xolair for that lung." Oh, and if you've been paying attention to what we know about Lev, you should be starting to put the pieces together the same way the Admiral's putting pieces together. At the top of 241, the Admiral is redeeming himself and setting things right bit by bit. So, why do you think the Admiral just sent MB to live with his ex-wife? I'm hoping you're putting these things together. On chapter 31, this one's called the Mob. Okay, this is where that whole group of people is kind of functioning as one character. They're left behind at where Roland and so the mob of people are gossiping about where MB may have gone. Okay, and they're like, "What did the Admiral do with MB? They sold MB to be unwound, and the Admiral's going to use that thick head of hair that MB had." And so Roland is planting that idea that the Admiral has been doing that. Chapter 39 focuses on Roland. Connor leaves a note for Roland saying, "I know what you did." And Roland, and he wants to meet Roland in this abandoned airplane. Roland's going to go ahead and go to the meeting, and he takes a knife with him just in case. Chapter 40, then we jump over to Connor's perspective of this meeting. He gets Roland to come into the dark jet. He's been in the dark jet for a while, so his eyes have adjusted to not very much light, where Roland's hasn't. He gets the jump on Roland and puts a gun, the Admiral's gun, to Roland's head, and he threatens him and tells him he needs to go to crate 2933. That's the same crate where the 5 kids died and where they found the dead Goldens. And he figures if he puts him in that crate, then he's going to be able to get him to confess to killing the Goldens. Roland acts arrogant, even with a gun on him. Connor tells him to get into the crate. Roland spins to get the upper hand, but it doesn't quite work, and Connor locks him in the crate and says, okay, now let's talk. But back at the compound, while Roland and Connor are having this meeting, the mob is going crazy. It's a super short chapter, which keeps that action going. They have a search party, go out and try and find MB, and it doesn't work, and so they're starting to panic. And this idea that panic spreads across a mob of people and makes a mob of people do things that they wouldn't normally do is, it's called mob mentality, actually, and it happens right here in this chapter. If you remember the story, All Summer in a Day, those elementary school kids kind of got sucked into the idea of mob mentality and did some things that they wouldn't normally do. In chapter 42, Rissa is tending to some shoulder pain that the Admiral is complaining of, and she hears an angry mob. It's that angry mob that got all worked up about where MB is, and then they realize that Roland and Connor aren't anywhere, and so they were going to confront the Admiral because they think the Admiral's done something with them now too. So Rissa is there in the airplane with the Admiral when the mob shows up, and in chapter 43, the mob starts shouting, "Get him, pull him out." Rissa looks through the window of the airplane, and the mob sees her, and they start to assume that the Admiral has a girl in the airplane unwillingly with them, and they start to tear the place apart. They tear apart the air conditioning, they tear apart the power supply. Then jump to, again, Connor and Roland. Connor confronts him and says, "You murdered these people." And Roland denies it, and then he says, "Look, I'll make you a deal." But then we have a stalemate. And they jump out of that chapter to get back to the chapter with the mob. They can't get into the jet, so they start to spread out and destroy other areas of the airplane hangar. But the heat is starting to cook Rissa and the Admiral inside the airplane. Then we jump back to the chapter with Connor. Roland confesses many tiny things that he's done, many manipulative, nasty little things. Hayden shows up, and he's like, "Connor, you got to get back to the airplane hangar. There's total chaos." Oh my gosh. Then he tells them of the mob scene and the fact that the mob is starting to beat Cleaver. Okay, Cleaver's the helicopter pilot, and Cleaver is also in that little ring of people that Lev has been meeting. Cleaver's the one who is like, "Chaos rules. I live for chaos." So Connor goes back. He leaves Roland locked up because he doesn't want to let him out. He goes back to the airplane hangar and finds the kids still beating Cleaver, pulls them off of him, shouts at them that they should be ashamed of themselves, and tells Cleaver, "You're going to be okay." Cleaver smiles at him then, and he says, "Chaos, I love it." And as soon as Connor sees him smile, he knows. He knows that Cleaver was responsible for things, but Connor accuses him and Roland of killing the Goldens. And Cleaver smiles and says, "Roland has nothing to do with this. This is my doing." So then on page 252, Cleaver dies. Connor confronts the mob, and he finds Rissa and the Admiral in the jet, and the Admiral's really in a bad way. On page 253, you hear the Admiral say, Connor is telling the Admiral, "Cleaver did it, Cleaver did it, Cleaver killed the Goldens." And he said, and then someone shouts out from the crowd, "Yeah, well, what about MB?" And the Admiral's hand flutters up, and he can barely talk, and he says, my son." And someone says, "MB's his son?" That doesn't quite make sense. And so rumors are starting, and this is when you should really put those pieces together, okay? The Admiral's having like a heart attack, Rissa tells him, and Connor needs to get them to a hospital because it's way beyond what she can do for him. The only way for them to get to a hospital is to fly the helicopter. Idea. So Connor says, "I know what to do." He's going to go back, and he's going to get Roland out of the crate and get him to fly the Admiral and Rissa and himself to the hospital. So he does that. and they admit the Admiral, but it's really dangerous for them to be at the hospital. Roland pulls aside one of the doctors and he says, hey, those 2 kids that came in here, they're runaway unwinds. Call the juvie cops. And that's where we leave that chapter, with the Admiral in the hospital and Connor and Rissa in danger of being caught by the juvie cops. But Roland's not even thinking about himself. He's a runaway unwind too. So it's getting really exciting. Have a great day.